The dream that refused to die there was a girl who lived in a small, quiet town. She didn't have much, but she had one thing that made her different. A dream that burned inside her heart. She wanted to be a musician, not just any musician, but one who played the violin on the grandest stages of the world. She wasn't born with talent given on a silver plate. She didn't have famous teachers or fancy lessons. What she had was an old violin passed down by her grandfather. The strings were worn, the wood scratched, but to her, it was a treasure. Every night, when the world was asleep, would close her room door and start playing. At first, the sounds were rough, her fingers stiff, sometimes the strings screeched, and even she winced at the noise. But she didn't stop. She played again and again. Every day after school, she would rush home, grab the violin, and practice until her fingers went numb. Her parents watched with concern. They loved her but worried. They often said, "Music won't fill your stomach? You need a real job." But the girl didn't listen. She believed in the sound she heard in her head, a sound she was determined to bring to life with her violin. By the time she finished high school, she knew exactly what she wanted. She would apply to every prestigious music school she could find. She believed her years of practice would finally pay off. She recorded audition videos, filled out endless forms, and sent applications to every place she dreamed of. Weeks passed. Then months. The first rejection letter arrived, then the second, the third. And soon her inbox was full of polite declines. "Thank you for your application." But unfortunately, those words felt like knives every time she saw them. A little part of her heart broke. She tried to stay strong, telling herself that one school would say yes. But the rejections kept coming. She started avoiding people. She didn't want to answer their questions. "Did you get in? Which school accepted you?" She smiled weakly and said, "Still waiting." But inside she was crumbling. At night, when no one was watching, she cried into her pillow. She wasn't crying because she didn't try. She cried because she gave everything she had, and it still wasn't enough. Her friends began moving on with their lives. Some got into colleges, some got jobs. Some even joked about her, saying, "You're still playing that old violin? Maybe it's time to grow up." She laughed with them. But the laughter didn't reach her eyes. Every time she picked up the violin after that, her hands hesitated, doubt crept in. Maybe she wasn't good enough. Maybe the schools were right. Maybe this wasn't her path. But then one evening, something changed. She sat by her window, staring at the twilight sky. The violin rested beside her. She thought of giving it up, of locking it away forever. But as she looked at the fading sunlight, she remembered the first time she held the violin. She remembered the joy of making music. Even if it wasn't perfect, she remembered how the sound made her heart race, how it made her feel alive. That night, she picked up the violin, tuned the strings, and started playing, not for any school, not for approval, but for herself. She played her heart out. The notes carrying her pain, her frustration, her hope. The music wasn't flawless, but it was real. It was hers. And in that moment, she made a promise to herself. She wouldn't let rejection kill her dream. She wouldn't need a school's permission to play. If the world didn't want her music in a concert hall, she would play it on the streets, if no teacher wanted to guide her. She would teach herself through every wrong note and every painful blister. Because the dream wasn't just about fame or acceptance. It was about the love she had for the violin, for music itself. She decided right then, her dream would not die. Not in silence, not in doubt. She would find her own stage, even if it was a street corner, and so she wiped her tears, tightened her grip on the bow, and prepared for a path she never imagined. A path where the streets would become her first audience, where strangers would hear her before the world did. Her story wasn't over, it was just beginning. The dream that refused to die had just found its second breath. The morning after her decision, the air felt different. She wasn't sure if it was bravery or just stubbornness, but something inside her had shifted. She stepped out of her house, carrying the old violin case like it was armor. She had no idea where to go, no clue where a musician belonged in a world that didn't want her. She wandered the city streets, looking at faces that didn't know her story. Every building, every alley seemed like a dead end. Still, She kept walking until she found herself in a busy square. Musicians, painters, and performers were scattered. Around the city buzzed with life, people rushing, laughing, living. She stood still, watching a street performer play the guitar. A small crowd had gathered, clapping along. Some tossed coins into his open case. He wasn't perfect, but he was free. A strange thought crossed her mind. Maybe she could try here. She glanced down. At her violin case, her heart whispered, "This could be your stage." But her mind screamed, "What if they laugh? What if no one stops?" She hesitated, watching the performer finish his song and bow with a smile. People clapped. A little boy even gave him a flower. The girl stood frozen. Unsure if she had the courage to take his place when he left, she waited, but the moment passed. Someone else took the spot. She walked away, her steps heavy, that night, back in her small room. She couldn't sleep. The image of the musician playing freely haunted her. Why couldn't she just try? What was she so afraid of? The next morning, she told herself, "Today you try, even if you fail." She returned to the square. Her violin case feeling heavier than ever, she stood in the same corner, watching the same crowd. Her hands shook as she opened the case and tightened the strings. She drew the bow across the strings. The first notes came out, shaky, thin. Barely enough to catch attention, she kept playing, closing her eyes. Pretending she was alone in her room, minutes passed, but no one stopped. People walked by, some glancing briefly, most ignoring her completely. Her cheeks burned with shame. Doubt whispered again, "You're not meant for this." She almost stopped, almost packed up and ran. But then she remembered the promise she made. She was doing this for herself, not for applause. So she kept playing, her body swaying gently with each note she played. A melody her grandfather once taught her, one that reminded her of simpler times. Slowly, almost like magic, a couple paused nearby. Then a child tugged at his mother's hand to watch. A few more heads turned. Coins clinked softly into her case. She didn't open her eyes. She didn't need to. The music carried her. And for the first time, the streets listened when she finished. She opened her eyes to see a small crowd. Some smiled, some clapped softly. A man even shouted, "Beautiful." Her heart raced not from fear, but from joy. She did it. She had played in front of strangers, and the world hadn't ended. It wasn't a concert hall. It wasn't a fancy school, but it was her stage. She packed up with trembling hands, not from weakness, but from excitement. As she walked home, her steps felt lighter. But when she returned home, reality waited. Her parents saw the few coins in her hand and shook their heads. "You're wasting your time," they said. "This isn't a life." Her friends laughed when she told them, "You playing on the streets? That's just begging with music." Their words stung, but not enough to stop her. She had tasted something different that day, freedom. Still, every insult, every doubting look added weight to her shoulders at times. She questioned herself. She looked at her empty bank account, the cracked violin, the worn shoes. Was this really her path? But every morning, despite the doubts, she returned to that corner. She played in the cold, in the heat, under gray skies and golden sunsets. Some days where good people smiled, tipped, cheered. Other days where hard rain drove people away. Some mocked her, but with every note she played, she was fighting, not just for her music, but for herself, for her dream, her stubborn, unbreakable dream. She learned to survive the whispers, the laughter, the indifference. The world might not have given her a place, but she was carving her own space with her violin. The girl who was rejected by every music school was now a musician of the streets. She wasn't famous, not yet, but she was heard, and deep down, she knew. This was just the beginning. The world hadn't seen her best yet. She had made the streets her stage, but deep inside, she still carried the ache of rejection every time she played her violin in that busy square. She felt both free and invisible. Some days the world listened, other days it rushed by, never noticing the music or the girl behind it, yet she kept coming back. She told herself it was enough that she was playing, enough that some strangers smiled. But one afternoon, something unexpected happened. The sky was heavy with gray clouds, the air smelled of rain, but she played anyway. Each stroke of her bow was gentle, telling a story of hope. She was halfway through her favorite song when an old woman stopped in front of her. The woman didn't drop a coin, didn't speak. She simply stood there, watching with soft eyes. Her hands were weathered, her coat faded when the girl finished the song. The old woman approached and whispered, "Play for your soul, not for their pockets." Then she smiled and walked away, disappearing into the crowd. Those words echoed. In her mind, play for your soul. That night she thought about the woman's advice. All this time she had been playing to survive, to prove she was worthy. But maybe that was the problem. She was still chasing approval. First from the schools. Now from strangers. The next day, she did something different. She didn't pick her usual songs. She played the ones that spoke to her heart. Melodies that reminded her of childhood, of dreams, of her late grandfather's warm voice. She closed her eyes and let the music guide her hands. She forgot about the coins, the watching eyes. And something shifted. People stopped, not just to listen, but to feel. A couple embraced while she played. A man wiped a tear from his cheek. A child sat cross-legged on the ground, completely mesmerized. She had stopped performing. She was sharing, and the world noticed. Then, on a cool evening, when the sun was melting into the horizon, a young man with a camera watched from a distance. He wasn't just any passerby. He was a content creator. Always hunting for real, raw stories, he recorded her without a word, capturing every note, every sway, every emotion on her face. He uploaded the video to his social media that very night with a simple caption. "This girl plays like she's pouring her heart through the strings." She had no idea any of this had happened. But the next morning, everything changed. Her phone buzzed. Non-stop. Messages, notifications, comments flooded in. Friends she hadn't spoken to in years texted her, "You're going viral." Confused, she clicked the link someone sent her. The video of her playing in the square was everywhere shared. Thousands of times, people were commenting things like, "She's incredible." "Who is she?" I felt that in my soul overnight. The girl no one wanted in their music school had become the girl the internet couldn't get enough of. By noon, her inbox was filled with invitations, small gigs, collaborations even. Interview requests. A famous local musician messaged her saying, "I'd love to play with you someday." For a while, she just stared at her screen in disbelief. How could this be real? But it was. Suddenly, she wasn't just a street performer. She was a story, an inspiration. People wanted to know where she came from, why she played, what kept her going. She could have packed up then and left the streets behind, but she didn't. She returned to that same corner, violin in hand. This time, when she played, people came searching for her. Not just random passers-by, but fans. People held their phones up, recording, streaming live, singing along to her tunes for the first time in her life. She wasn't being rejected, she was being seen, truly seen. And all of it happened because she stopped chasing validation. She played for herself, for her soul. That was the turning point, not just for her music, but for her life, she realized. Then that the world often ignores you until you start being unapologetically yourself. The girl who was once invisible was now the girl everyone wanted to listen to. Not because she changed who she was, but because she finally embraced it, and in her heart. She knew the journey was far from over. This was just the beginning of something much bigger. Her violin had found its voice, and so had she. She had become a quiet sensation online, yet every morning, she returned to the same cracked pavement, violin case in hand. She didn't need to anymore. She was getting invitations, interviews, and offers from small music venues. But the street still called her. It was the place that had first listened. When no one else did, that morning was brighter than usual. The sun poured down like gold on the square. The breeze carried the scent of coffee and fresh bread from nearby stalls. She stood in her usual spot, setting her violin case down. People already recognized her now. Some waved. Others smiled and nodded knowingly. But as she prepared to play, something was different this time. There was an energy in the air, a quiet anticipation. When she drew her bow and played the first note, The sound was richer, deeper. She wasn't the same girl who had once trembled at the thought of strangers watching. Now each note flowed from her like a conversation, not just between her and the violin, but between her and the city itself. She played songs that weren't written on paper, melodies that came from moments, the laughter of a couple passing by, the cry of a baby in a stroller, the rustle of leaves in the distance. People stopped in waves. Some clapped softly, others swayed. A group of teenagers recorded her with wide eyes, not just because she was good, but because she played like her. Music carried secrets they all wanted to know. An elderly man approached quietly. He placed a folded note in her violin case instead of coins. She paused and picked it up when the song ended. It read, "Thank you for reminding me what beauty sounds like." She smiled, holding back tears. Gas. The streets had become her classroom, her concert hall, her sanctuary. Word spread beyond the city.
Oh, babe.
Local TV stations wanted to feature her story. She agreed, but only if they recorded her playing on the streets, not in some polished studio. She wanted the world to see where it all began, not under stage lights, but under sunlight and the gaze of strangers. One afternoon, while playing under an old stone bridge, rain began to fall, light at first, then heavier. People scattered. Pulling their jackets over their heads, she was left alone, water pooling at her feet. The old her would have packed up and gone home, but not this time. Instead, she tightened her grip on the bow and played louder, stronger. The rain pelted down, drenching her hair, her clothes sticking to her skin, but her music soared, defying the storm. Someone filmed her soaked to the bone, yet lost in her melody. That video spread even faster than the first. People called her the violinist of the rain. They said they could hear the storm in her strings, the defiance in her notes. Suddenly, she wasn't just an internet sensation. She was a symbol of perseverance, an artist who played through the rain. Music schools that had once rejected her started sending invitations again. Their emails said things like, "We'd love to have you join our program. Your talent deserves formal training." She smiled bitterly at those messages, remembering their rejection letters. But she wasn't angry, just different now. She didn't need their approval. She had built something without them. Her music had lived and grown on the streets, not in classrooms. And yet with each offer, a question gnawed at her. Should she accept? Should she finally walk through the doors that were once slammed shut? But when she asked herself where she truly belonged, the answer was clear. The streets had given her a voice, and she wasn't ready to leave them behind. She started teaching music to children who watched her play. Some of them couldn't afford lessons, so she taught them for free. Sitting cross-legged on the pavement, her stage remained the same cracked tiles. Passing cars, curious eyes, yet her world had grown. She wasn't just the girl who played for coins anymore. She was the girl who played for souls. And as each day passed, she realized that sometimes the greatest concert halls are made of stone and sky, where every stranger who stops to listen becomes part of your story. The streets weren't just where she played. They were where she lived, where she healed, where she taught in her music. It was no longer just about proving herself. It was about connection. It was about life. It was a Sunday afternoon when her life changed forever. She didn't know it yet. But the song she played that day under the old bridge wasn't just music, it was a spark. The sky was heavy with rain clouds, and most people stayed indoors. Streets felt quieter, emptier. She thought about skipping the day. But something inside her insisted she'd go. She wrapped herself in a thin jacket, picked up her violin, and headed out. The old bridge had become her favorite spot. The stone walls echoed her music, carrying the sound farther than her voice ever could. She stood beneath it, the air damp and chilly. She tuned the strings carefully, the wooden body of the violin creaking slightly in the cold. Then she played. She played a melody that wasn't written in any book. It was born from the coldness in her bones, the weight of every rejection, and the stubborn hope still burning inside her. She played for herself, for the empty streets, for the sky that looked ready to cry. What she didn't see was a man across the street watching. He stood quietly under an umbrella, his phone raised, filming every second. Or he's not a journalist, nor a musician, just someone who stumbled upon her music while seeking shelter from the coming rain. He didn't know her name, didn't know her story, but something in her music felt raw, honest, like a confession made without words.
Hey.
He uploaded the video to his social media later that evening with a caption, "I don't know who she is." But she played as if the world was listening even when no one was. He slept, thinking nothing of it. But when he woke up, his phone wouldn't stop buzzing. The video had gone viral, not just in their city, not just in the country, but across the world. People were sharing it with comments like, "This is what passion looks like. I cried listening to this." "She deserves a bigger stage." Famous musicians retweeted it. Influencers posted about her. Music critics praised her soulfulness, even without knowing her name. Back in her small room, she woke to dozens of missed calls, hundreds of messages. At first, she thought something terrible had happened. But when she finally opened her notifications, she was stunned. Her face, her music, her story, it was everywhere. Friends she hadn't spoken to in years sent her links. People she didn't know were tagging her, asking who she was. Some called her the violin girl of the rain. Others called her the bridge violinist. She didn't know how to feel overwhelmed. Grateful, confused, excited, all at once. Within days, news stations contacted her. Journalists wanted interviews. TV producers wanted her on their shows. Music producers sent offers. Some promised fame. Others promised record deals, even the music. Schools that once rejected her reached out. Their emails now said, "We'd be honored to have you." As if the past had never happened, but she wasn't the same girl anymore. The one who begged for a place for a yes. She had built her place with every note played in the cold. Every song under the rain, she accepted some invitations, but on her own terms. She played live on TV, but insisted they film her first where it all began, under the old bridge, where her story was born when the cameras rolled. She played the same melody that went viral, but this time, the bridge wasn't empty. Hundreds stood around, some with umbrellas, some standing in the rain just to hear her play. Tears welled in her eyes as she played. She wasn't just playing music, she was playing her journey, her pain, her resilience. When she finished, the crowd erupted in applause, not polite claps, but loud, heartfelt cheers. In that moment, she realized something powerful. She didn't need approval from institutions or fancy stages. The world was already her stage. The streets, the rain, the people. This was her audience. What started as a lonely performance under a bridge had become a global song. Her name was finally known. Not because a school deemed her worthy, but because the world decided to listen, and deep inside, she smiled. Because the girl once invisible was now unforgettable. But she knew this was just the beginning. The real music, the real journey, was still ahead. She never imagined her name would travel farther than her own small town. Yet here she was, reading headlines from places she'd never even visited. Newspapers called her the girl who played through the rain. Some articles called her the bridge violinist. And others simply named her the soulful street musician. Everywhere she went now, people recognized her. Some asked for photos. Some just thanked her for the music. But even with all the attention, she never felt distant from the streets. She still returned to the old bridge, her first and truest stage. But everything felt different now. The small crowd that used to gather had grown into hundreds. On weekends, people traveled from other cities just to watch her perform live. Some brought flowers, others carried signs that read, "You made us believe again." One afternoon, while she was playing a soft, haunting melody, she noticed a little girl sitting right at the front. Barefoot clothes a little torn, but her eyes wide with wonder. After finishing the piece, the musician knelt down and asked, "Do you like the violin?" The girl nodded shyly. "I want to play, but we can't afford one." That moment hit deep. It was as if she was looking at herself from years ago, longing to create music, but locked out by circumstances. Without hesitation, she stood up, reached into her case, and gave the little girl the violin she had just played. The crowd gasped softly, watching the moment unfold. "You'll play better than me one day," she whispered to the child. A man recorded the moment and posted it online. By morning, the video had already spread like wildfire. People from all over offered to donate violins to kids who couldn't afford them. Some even started funds to support free music lessons for underprivileged children. She realized then that her music was no longer just about her. It was a bridge of connection between dreams and reality for kids who thought talent alone wasn't enough. Invitations poured in from music festivals across the globe. Some of the finest halls offered her their stages, but she had one condition. "I'll play your grand stages, but I'll still play on the streets." People didn't understand at first why return to the pavement when she had velvet seats and golden lights waiting. But the streets were her roots. They were where her music was born. It's raw and real. She stood on global stages, playing in front of thousands, under spotlights that shimmered like stars. Yet every time the audience stood in applause, she imagined the sound of coins dropping into her old violin case, the smiles of strangers on rainy afternoons, the little girl with wide eyes. She carried that street soul with her. Always, and with each performance, more people listened not just to the music, but to the story behind it. Music schools that once rejected her now sent formal offers to teach. To inspire students with her story, some even asked if they could feature her journey in their curriculum. She chuckled at the irony. But she didn't let pride make her bitter. Instead, she accepted some invitations, not to teach theory, but to teach the heart of music. She told students, "Technique is important, but soul is what makes people stop and listen. Whether it's on a stage or on the sidewalk, play with your whole heart." Her influence grew beyond music. She was invited to speak at conferences, to share her journey of failure, grit, and grace. She spoke not just about music, but about rejection, resilience, and finding your own path when all doors close. And wherever she went, she always ended with her violin, letting the strings speak where words couldn't yet. Her favorite moments were still under that old stone bridge, when the sun dipped low and the city grew quiet. She played for herself, for the sky, for the wind that remembered her first timid notes, because even though the world was listening now, she never wanted to forget the silence that once surrounded her. It was in that silence that she found her sound. It was on those streets that she found herself, and now the whole world listened not just to the music, but to the girl who never gave up when no one was watching. Years had passed since that rainy afternoon under the old bridge, but she remembered it as clearly as if it were yesterday. She still remembered how the rain felt cold on her skin, how her bow felt slippery in her hand, and how every note carried the weight of her broken dreams. But now, standing backstage at one of the most prestigious concert halls in the world, she smiled to herself. The stage beyond the curtain was vast, rows upon rows of velvet seats, chandelier hanging above like a floating galaxy, the kind of place she once thought was out of reach. A woman in a headset approached her. "You're on in 5 minutes." She nodded, breathing deeply. Her fingers grazed the polished wood of her new violin. It was not the old, cracked one from her childhood, but she still carried that first violin in her heart. The audience tonight was special. Many of the faces seated out there were familiar, the same music directors, professors, and critics who once rejected her applications. They were here now, not as gatekeepers, but as guests invited by her. She thought about it often, not with bitterness, but with quiet satisfaction. She had reached the stage they said she wasn't good enough for, but she didn't need their validation anymore. She was here on her own terms, because of the streets, because of the rain, because of every person who ever stopped to listen as the lights dimmed and the announcer called her name. She stepped onto the stage, the room erupted in applause, but she waited, letting the noise settle, letting the stillness embrace her. She raised the violin to her chin, her bow hovering just above the strings. Then she played. The melody that filled the hall wasn't just a song, it was a story the same. Story she played under the bridge, the one that had gone viral, the one that had carried her from the pavement to the grandest halls. But here, in this elegant, echoing space, it sounded different, fuller, warmer, yet it still carried the soul of the streets. The honesty of her beginnings, as she played, she caught glimpses of the audience. Some closed their eyes. Some smiled, some wiped their tears, and when she finished, the silence that followed was deep and respectful. Then, the applause roared, rising like a wave crashing through the hall. She stood there, humbled, smiling, bowing gently. But instead of walking off, she spoke. "Before I go, I want to thank the streets, the rain, and the people who gave me my first audience," she said softly. "Without them, I wouldn't be." Standing here, the audience listened, many nodding. Others still caught in the emotion of her words, and to the ones who told me no, she continued, "Thank you too." Because every rejection pushed me to find my own stage, the applause returned, louder, richer, as if the entire hall understood the journey she'd taken. After the performance, backstage was a flurry of praise, handshakes, and photo requests. But amidst the crowd, an elderly man approached, his eyes kind. His hands a little shaky. "I was one of those who reviewed your application years ago," he admitted. "We didn't see it then, but we see it now. I'm sorry." She smiled warmly. "Thank you. But there's nothing to apologize for. If things had gone differently, I wouldn't have found the streets, and the streets taught me what no school ever could." Looked at her with admiration, then chuckled softly. "You've taught us all something tonight," that night, as she left the grand hall. Her heart wasn't heavy with pride, but with gratitude she stepped outside into the cool night air. The city lights flickering like tiny stars, she looked up at the sky, remembering all the nights she'd played with nothing but streetlights and strangers for company. And then she whispered to herself, "Full circle," because she knew, deep down, that life had brought her back to where it all began, but with the music stronger, the heart braver, and the soul louder. She didn't just play for applause anymore. She played for the journey, for the streets, for the dream that refused to die, and the world. The world was still listening. Fame had come, opportunities too. But none of it changed the girl who once stood trembling under a gray sky with a worn-out violin. She had played in grand halls, crossed borders, shared stages with names she once only read about, yet in her heart, she was still that street musician, the girl of the bridge, the rain, and the stubborn dream. She didn't keep her story to herself. She believed it wasn't just hers anymore. It belonged to anyone who had ever been told you're not enough. Anyone who faced closed doors, cold shoulders, or dreams that seemed too distant. When people asked her, "What kept you going when no one believed in you?" she always smiled gently and said, "I believed when it didn't make sense to." I played not for approval, but because I didn't know how to stop. She started speaking more often at schools, not just music academies, but community centers. Small-town schools, places that reminded her of where she started. She didn't stand there as a celebrity, but as proof that persistence could outshine rejection in every session. She carried her violin. She would start by playing a song soft, soulful, every note a reminder of her journey. Then she'd say, "To the audience, don't wait for a stage to play your music. Create your own, even if it's just a sidewalk. Even if it's a street corner under the rain." One day, during a workshop, a young boy asked her, "How did you know you were good enough to keep going?" She paused, looked at the boy with a tender smile, and answered, "I didn't. I just knew I wasn't ready to give up. You see, being good enough isn't something others decide for you. It's something you feel when you're doing the thing you love even when nobody's watching." That answer stayed with many. It echoed through the halls she visited, scribbled into notebooks, posted as quotes online. Her music didn't just fill concert halls, it filled hearts. She also started a foundation to provide instruments to kids from poor families. She remembered the sting of not having access, the feeling of being locked out not by talent but by money. For every violin donated, she made sure it reached hands that were eager to learn, not just to play, but to dream. She even revisited the bridge under which she first found her courage. This time, she wasn't alone. She brought a group of young musicians, each from different walks of life, each carrying an instrument. They played together, laughter mixing. With music, people stopping, clapping, dancing. Some watched from their apartment windows, recording the magical gathering below. It was a living testament that from one girl's quiet struggle, a symphony had bloomed, even after all the fame. She never locked herself away in luxury. She kept walking the streets, listening to the sounds of the city, the rhythm of life, the pulse of everyday dreams. People would often stop her asking for advice. She always said the same thing. Your dream doesn't need a fancy door to walk through. Sometimes you just need to build your own door, even if it's made of old wood and stubborn nails. She didn't just want to be remembered as the girl who went viral. She wanted to be remembered as someone who proved that the streets can teach you what no classroom ever will. That failure isn't the opposite of success, it's part of it. And when asked what kept her grounded, she would laugh and say, the rain. I still remember how cold it felt that day. The streets remind me where I started. I owe them my story. Her music echoed longer than the applause. Her story traveled farther than any stage. And in quiet moments when no one was around, she still played just for herself, for the sky, for the streets that first listened, because the message she left behind was simple but powerful. Dreams don't die because the world says no. They die when you stop playing, so never stop playing. And somewhere, on a quiet street corner, under the soft drizzle of rain, another dreamer picks up an old instrument. Inspired by the girl who played on the street sand, changed the world.